So, Jason, thanks for joining us again.
Pleasure.
We talked previously about well-being, and we talked about what we can measure within a building to be able to understand the impact it will have on the well-being of the occupants and so on. We also just started to talk there about the sort of the more holistic concepts around this, around cross-departmental, cross-discipline thinking about how we can influence well-being rather than just in the bricks and mortar,
Yes.
And so on. So, for this piece, let's ask the big question. Well, what does building well actually mean?
Well, that's exactly it. And I think building well is about the obvious, making sure that the quality of the build is up and beyond. I think having a bit of pride in the construction that you're doing rather than just slapping something up. It's very hard to maintain that because obviously the expansion that we need within the industry, with the vast amount of housing that needs to be developed, but at the same time making sure that the quality of the construction is meeting an acceptable level that is not just going to be an issue within the next 30 to 40 years or even sooner, but then also looking at more of a holistic view of what does that building do for you? What is that building going to do for your family or the occupants? And how is that going to affect them in their own occupation of that building? So whether that's, physical, mental, financial health or sustainability. So everyone focuses around the sustainability of the construction, but actually how is that building going to react and continue to work with the occupants? I think that really sums it up for me.
Okay. So this is moving beyond the embodied carbon view of
Absolutely.
sustainability and construction into the more holistic space. It speaks, I think, to something we've talked about in previous episodes about understanding the purpose of the built environment sector. I think it's very important to see for anybody to understand whether the purpose is to put a roof over somebody's head, or is it to build a better, more sustainable future for that individual?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to be honest with you, it's in a degree, I think it's an excuse just saying to put a roof over someone's head. I think we're way past that. Our technology, our methods of construction, I think the infrastructure that's there, I think surpasses that. I think, yes, obviously, if you were in emergency housing and it was something completely different, then absolutely, a safe roof over your head, whatever that may be, then that ticks that box. But I think when you're looking at construction and buildings and new build properties and renovations, I think when you're looking at that specifically, it needs to go above and beyond. We need to be looking at how that building can be utilised and optimised. We've got the tech there to do it. We just haven't moved across enough to make sure we're utilising that technology to understand what we need to do for that. And it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach where you can go and build the same property blueprint over and over again and expect the same results. It just doesn't work. So I think by moving into that sector more and utilising more technology and data collection, we can then start accumulating quantitative data and be able to then analyze that very effectively and easily to then be able to start building much better buildings without all of these issues that come around it. People say, oh, but it's about time restraints, it's about money, it's about resource issues, it's about education. I mean, yes, all of those things have to be taken into account, but there is very little going forward that actually takes well-being into perspective and looking at enhancing the buildings rather than just it'll do, it meets standards.
Yeah, and talking of data, I've got one here that it's got some big numbers attached to it, but apparently the World Health Organiser has predicted the NHS will have £3.5 billion of funds drained by direct illness related to poor home conditions. Yeah. Surely that's an argument for thinking wider than the built environment industry and actually thinking about how we can promote this. I mean,
those figures from the World Health Organiser, I think it was 2019 to 2025, I believe. So yeah, absolutely. I think that sums it up massively, and it shows that there is such an importance for this, and you can't justify, oh, we don't have the money, we don't have the support, when in the same kind of holistic approach, where if you just look at a country and its, economy as a whole, going, well, okay, well, if that's the impact it's having there, why on earth aren't we putting more into making sure that this isn't happening within our homes, within local councils, across the board. It's not just a kind of nationwide issue. We then need to be going to local councils, local planning and development, and architects and all of these people, and actually then having a better understanding across the board.
Yeah. And presumably it's a difficult thing to achieve because it feels difficult to regulate. You can't force home builders down a particular route, particularly when, given what we've talked about before, you can't just keep churning out the same building. And actually it requires input from different disciplines, different professions and all the rest of it. Is it a local planning thing, or is this national government? Is this big government needing to get involved?
Big government and local. You're right in the sense, we can't ideology. Ideally, we would be saying yes, everything down to the minutest detail. Every house or every building will be absolutely optimized. That's not, when you're looking at economies of scale, that's not viable. We can sit here and say that all day long, but the main thing is making sure that everybody is aware of this importance and being able to reduce it and measure it, I think, as much as possible. Like new builds nowadays, there's so much build-up of formaldehyde, volatile organic compounds, build-up of, PM2.5s and PM10s, which are the particle size that can cause you kind of a lot of issues. Your air quality index, it's all the same stuff, unless you're really the minute amount of developers that are really conscious about it. Most of these new builds, they'll look amazing. They'll pass every test under the sun that's available right now and is regulatory. But you go in there and do a well-being test, they will fail. 9 times out of 10, they will fail. And if you then think, well, the majority of people going into those will likely have young families because you get Help to Buy schemes, things like that. It is a hidden, it's a hidden killer. It really is. And, and you have young people that all of a sudden have an onset of asthma come out of nowhere, and there is no connection to anything. Well, the likeliness is it's probably all of those toxins and pollutants that you're inhaling in your new build, but not just new builds, but new renovations. So look, we can't change everything overnight, and it's not something we can have a magic wand and say it's going to be perfect, but raising the awareness and being aware of it and managing it and monitoring it. So having internal air quality measures in place so we can actually physically see the levels, making sure that they're well ventilated where possible, making sure that we can reduce formaldehyde and toxic chemicals so that it's, at least reducing the amount of buildup in homes. And then at that point, we can then start connecting the dots. So if there's any kind of respiratory issues or ill health that we can connect with these types of issues in the environment, then occupants themselves can say, that's probably because of this. We need to find help here, or, we need to start doing something rather than living with it long term. That's where the real issue is.
Presumably there's an opportunity here as well to sort of internally regulate this. If there is good visibility of the risks of and the benefits of doing it better, then investors, finance houses, insurers can get more involved in deciding what is worth building and what isn't worth building.
Yeah, and also you could look at kind of health insurance as well. You could even look at down that angle of saying, well, if we have a universal accountability and measurements in place, then you can, I don't know, have an increase in your health insurance premium if you're living in a house which isn't healthy. So, it can even go down that route as well, because obviously you're more likely to rely on health insurance. You could even have, employers could potentially take the responsibility of trying to educate and support their staff at home, because inevitably it's going to lead to more sick days, whether it's themselves or whether their children need to have time off school. So it's going to affect your business. So it's not just the obvious of, do I live in a safe home? It's, do my staff live in a safe home? Or, do our doctors and nurses and things like that? I mean, I've even gone into quite recently, which is quite shocking. The medical industry doesn't recognize enough. It's almost as bad as the built environment for understanding internal health. So I've been to numerous doctors and people working in the NHS, and they've got, the automatic fragrance sprays everywhere in their house, and they're using bleach everywhere and all of this stuff, and it's kind of getting you can hardly breathe in their home, and it's like, wow, like this is not even just a little bit of this, is you actively causing harm to your house or your home. And it's then that very clear correlation between, it's like, well, the lack of understanding, even in the medical industry, if you rock up to the doctor and say, oh, I'm struggling to sleep, or I'm feeling really anxious in my house, or whatever, there's no questions at the minute to say, well, what's your house situation like? So it's both industries that I think need to collaborate, and the research needs to be there a lot more than it is.
Yeah. Another argument for more holistic thinking around it,
Yes, yeah.
definitely. I suppose I'd have a concern in just earlier on in that answer about the opportunity for, if a family finds themselves living in a house which, after they've been living in it for some time, they find is unhealthy,
Yep.
then increasing health insurance premiums is a penalty, particularly if they can't afford to move. There have to be other solutions for those individuals. If they can't afford to move, or desperately don't want to move,
Yeah.
there's got to be other mitigation within the property.
Absolutely. And I think that it would be a shame, obviously, if sort of, health insurance premiums and things kind of went up for it. But obviously that when data and I suppose realization, or the public conscious, gets to a certain level about an issue, it would inevitably happen, I think. If you live in an area that the crime rates go up, your buildings insurance is going to go up. So it's the same kind of data, kind of direct correlation. But you don't need to be forced out of your home to make sure your home is as healthy as can be. And I think that's really important. And that's a message that I'm really strongly for, is you always have a voice. You always, and you always have the right to live in a home that is healthy. So whether you're a tenant, a landlord, a homeowner, whatever it may be, there are always steps that you can take to make sure that the place you call home is as safe as possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think one of the other words you used a little while ago now around this that I think is important is accountability.
Yes.
As well, and the end-to-end accountability. Now, and I think that there are probably two different strands here. If we start talking about new build, then we will start talking about end-to-end accountability from the planning phase through the design, through the construction, to the handover, to the occupation. It's a bit more difficult. The man who built the house I live in died over 200 years ago. I can't get him to come around and fix anything.
No.
So, how we maintain accountability for all of the existing properties in the UK, or wherever we're looking, it is a difficult one to achieve. How can we start to bring some ownership to the problem?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. Again, going back to the realistic solutions, we can't, in an ideal world, we'd say every home needs to be, monitored and made to be as best as it can be. But in reality, that you just can't do that. Especially with the housing stock. If you go into building regs, when that really came in kind of mid 60s, and even then it was the starting point. So it's like everything that predates that is essentially a free for all of construction. Then. But then you're looking at what work can you do on the existing housing stock. It's, managing, and I think everybody has or managing the expectations. It's about everyone having the right to know what environment they're living in. So I think even just by kind of giving, whether it's grants, whether it's just knowledge or anything like that, to say, look, get yourself a test done. Get yourself a measurable kind of internal air quality meter. They're not expensive. The cheap ones, you don't need to have a super accurate professional one. You can pick one up for 20, 30 pounds and just have it in your home working, at least because not all old housing stock has bad air quality or poor well-being. For you, it's not a direct correlation to age of the property. But then at least you can manage it. And then you can then look from that perspective of going, okay, is there something I need to be looking into here? Is it something I need to raise? And then look at kind of going down the professional route of saying, what can I do to change this? Whereas new builds or renovation work, at that point, I think that's a great point where we can then hold accountability. So we can then say, right, you're going to be starting some work. what are the minimum standards? Clearly, we're not going to be saying, let's optimize every single building we're building, because it's just not realistic. But what's the minimum measurements? We've got carbon monoxide alarms in houses. We have fire alarms in houses. We've got thermostats. Amazing. Why don't we have air quality measurement? If you buy them in bulk for new build housing, really, it's going to cost maybe £50 per house, which, it is nothing really for the sake of what it's actually going to be doing.
Yeah. Going back to the non-new builds, if I invest my 20, 30 quid in an air quality meter and all the rest of it, identify that there's a problem.
Yes.
It's somewhere near the amber and the red than it is the green. And I go to the profession seeking help. How widely do you think the profession is able to support me in addressing this?
Honestly, at the minute, not very well. It's very much, you get a surveyor in, or you get anybody, even air quality people coming in at the moment, because it's not a as holistic view as possible. They can very much, you can go down a rabbit hole very easily, and I've known a lot of people do that. So, for example, you want one problem fixed, or you're looking at poor air quality. You might get a black spot mold specialist in. They're specifically looking at that. They're not looking at what may cause it, what other attributes there are, what other things may be going on. They're just looking at that, and that is the problem. You gas safe engineer, if you carbon monoxide, they're not looking at the black spot mold. So it's then having that approach which we need. We need free guidance. So, we're not saying we're going to, as a country, we should just give everyone free professional kind of support going in their houses, because everyone would go bust. But what we would need is free, accessible and trustworthy guidance where people can look it up, give good direction as to where they need to look, what maybe tips and tricks they can do at home for themselves to mitigate those things. Because it may be as simple as, look, you're just not opening trickle vents or windows, and it's then accumulating a lot of condensation in your bedroom, which is, and if you get kind of thermal bypass and things, which is heat escape, you get cold spots, which then attracts condensation, and then it will lead to black spot mold, and it will just, the cycle keeps going on. But if you then open a window and wipe the surfaces down, I'm not saying it gets rid of the issue at all, but what it will do is it will stop it coming back. So as long as you continue doing that, it will be fine. So it's these managing expectations. No one's going to come in and, for example, rip out the windows, put adequate contraband and thermal kind of, breaks in, and then put new windows in and all of this sort of stuff, unless you're going to renovate your home. But it's managing what you've got and what you've got in existence, and kind of almost dealing with that, what you've got to your disposal, really.
Yeah, and then just having the information to make the incremental gains.
Absolutely.
Or the affordable gains, or whatever else. Okay, so I think we've established that there's a patchy awareness across the profession and the industry, and there's definitely work to do in raising levels of awareness and training people around this. Now, you've been telling me previously about a case study, a part of your research you've been working on. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a big believer in trying to get primary research rather than just relying on secondary research or existing research. So before I went down the path of, well, how do I contribute to this? How can I, do my bit to try and make things better? I needed to try and at least understand where some of those pitfalls were. Mm-hmm. So I sent out a case study to various building regulation departments around the country, and specific EPC assessors, for example, on just a building that I was looking to renovate. And I kind of made the thing where it's next to a river. The orientation was very specific. We were looking at renovating it. I gave all these kind of key points, and I was saying, is there any advice that you can give me from whether it's an EPC perspective or building regulation authority? I contacted, it was about 20 odd in each, so it's quite a few, and every single one came back and just referred me to building regulations. Right. None of them could give me an answer. And then obviously you go to building regs, and that doesn't give you an answer either. So, if you were even trying, and you were, even a professional in the industry, if you were trying to get this advice, it doesn't come from government.
Okay. And is it a government job? Is this down to the chartered bodies? Is it about competency frameworks? Is it about CPD? Where do you think this is not delivering what we need at the moment?
I think every single layer, because there's pointless, well, it's almost pointless if regulatory bodies are trying to enforce something that's not legally enforceable, because then you're still going against the grain and you're still saying, well, yes, we are raising awareness and yes, you will be there for those that are actively looking for it, but then still contractors, there's no obligation. Why would they? There's nothing in building regulations or anything that stipulates this needs to meet a certain level of well-being. None of that. So then when you're looking at the bottom line of, well, how much is a building going to be worth? If someone's looking at buying it, there's not enough there to make that change. So I think has to come from government. And then after that, there's then the demand or requirement for everything else to catch up. There's the requirement for professionals such as surveyors, quantity surveyors, architects, all of these people to know what this is and how they can do it. So therefore the CPD becomes relevant. Then the courses become relevant. Then everything else starts becoming relevant because it's been made mandatory to a level. Like I said before, it doesn't have to be all singing and dancing. You have to make it as optimal as possible because it's just not financially viable. But we need to have a universal minimum standard for well-being.
And then one final question on this. You've been very heavily invested in this personally for a few years now. You still remain optimistic about it. You still remain passionate about it. That comes through. Do you see the dial shifting on this? I suspect you're going to tell me not fast enough, but do you see it at least moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I do. I mean, everything, it takes a long time for this stuff to go through, but I think everything relies on understanding. I think understanding and then understanding the accuracy and the measures of this. I don't think that's not been done fast enough. There's not enough invested in the research behind it. People are also, unfortunately, there are companies that are almost exploiting it, where they're kind of selling products that are, environmentally friendly. Well, they may be environmentally friendly, but they may still be putting harmful pollutants and toxins in the air. So they're kind of shifting the terminology for advertising and marketing gains. And I think all of this needs a lot more research, a lot more accountability. And I think at that point, once we got that framework in place, I think things will start shifting quicker than it's doing right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully it gathers momentum and moves very quickly.
Absolutely. I hope so.
Great. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Fascinating subject.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.